This week on the Eldritch Lorecast,
Daggerheart has released early by accident.
People's campaigns could already be done by the time the game comes out everywhere else.
Dragon Delves preview.
it's Dungeons and Dragons, and you're not going to have me fight a dragon at the best possible level.
Jeremy Crawford also retiring from Wizards of the Coast.
Chris and Jeremy are these masters of the legend of D&D.
Stories with weird Uncle Shawn.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast, and nothing else. No economics this week. We're not diving into that again. That was a nightmare last week. It's the never-ending nightmare that continues, but things are changing so fast I can't keep up. My name's Ben Byrne, by the way. If this is your first episode listening, you've picked a good one because I am joined, as always, by James Hake, Shawn Merwin, and this week, Diana Fay joining us. Welcome back to the Lorecast.
Hello, thanks for having me back. Oh my gosh, it's such an honor to be invited back and not added to a blacklist after every podcast that I do. It's great.
We have that. We have that, Adam. I do have a question for you, or more accurately though, Diana, Dean has a question who emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com and asked, and I really like this question, who was your first game master? How did they run their game? And what lesson did you learn from them that you still apply to your game today?
I think this is kind of a cop-out answer, mostly because my first ever D&D game lasted maybe 2 weeks, if I'm being generous, before scheduling knocked it into the dirt. But that 2 weeks was enough to get me hooked on the game, and now I'm here. So, but my first ever game master was a friend of mine who I met playing Minecraft forever ago. I still haven't met this guy in person, but we're still good friends. And he had a very interesting sort of start to a game, which was all homebrew, but it was so based around the player characters' backstories and so deeply embedded in these, like, at the time, maybe 3 paragraphs that I had given this guy about my character. And so he made it so that the main characters were, the main NPCs were relatives of, my character. And we were in like our old hometown. And then we were slowly uncovering, party members' histories just by virtue of doing the quests as we would. And so that was probably, I don't know, one of the first lessons I learned, and now I have it deeply embedded into everything I do and teach.
There's an issue sometimes where the party all kind of get together and it's like, why are we together? Why are we here? Why would we do this thing? And kind of stitching the group into the campaign organically is just the best feeling in the world, I think.
My first ever dungeon master was a dear friend of mine in high school. That person later went on to be my housemate after college, and we've been best friends for a very long time. That campaign lasted for, I would say, probably a couple of months in the summer between my freshman and sophomore years of high school. I played a very boring sort of Aragorn knockoff ranger named Mars, who had the worst dice luck imaginable. I think I was a poster child for nat ones in that campaign. And after that, I said, never again will I play. I will always DM from here on out. That's not what really happened, but I get teased for it from that gaming group to this day.
People don't become DMs out of necessity anymore. They do it because they're so relentlessly bullied by karmic dice in the player side that they're like, all right, screw this. I give up. If I'm going to roll badly, at least it's going to be someone else's benefit.
Yes.
Yeah, more dice rolls that way.
I'm going to ask a question back to the three of you. Can you remember what you were doing 45 years ago?
Oh, God.
Okay.
I'm glad you made that joke because
So with that in mind, I honestly can't remember who my first DM was. It was one of 2 folks, and they both ran great campaigns. So I'm going to call out Chuck and I'm going to call out Steve. Steve made his own world, made his own rules, and he could bring mystery into a game, and you just wanted to find out what's going on. Why are there these strange plants in this garden? Why is this mist-covered area spitting out undead? He could bring that mystery like nobody else. So that I learned from him. Chuck ran games in the Forgotten Realms when that setting came out, and his storytelling was all detail-oriented. So you could role play going to the theater for three hours, and you didn't get tired of it. And it always came back to the story that was ongoing. So that side of the game I learned from Chuck, and I can almost still point to things I write and say, oh, yeah, that was Steve. Oh, yeah, that was Chuck. Even after all these years, these lessons still bubble up, and it's great to have these memories that I can often remember.
My first game master was actually my older brother, who gamed for me when I was already an adult because I didn't get into D&D until later in life. But honestly, I mean, what he taught me was a love of games to create story. Because games, in a way, whether it's a video game, a tabletop game, a board game, a war game, the rules make the story feel like it matters a little bit more, feels like you are interacting with something else and not just kind of making it all up, feel like you are overcoming challenges as the story kind of grows and builds. It feels like I didn't just write a story about a heroic guy who overcomes all the challenges because I decided that he or they did. They actually overcame those challenges because there was resistance from the game system on the other side of it to, create challenge. So thank you very much, Dean, for that question. We are going to jump in. We've got some hobby news this week, which is nice, as opposed to the intense political news we had last week. Daggerheart has released early by accident in Australia specifically, which I'm going to call karmic, not against Critical Role or Darrington Press, but against every other release usually coming late to Australia by comparison.
Amazing.
According to Reddit, Daggerheart accidentally dispatched to Australia if you had pre-ordered it 6 weeks before its release date. Darcy Ross, Darrington Press's marketing manager, I believe, has asked via the Discord that Australian fans please refrain from talking about the unreleased content in the Discord in public spaces and refrain from making public videos and photography of it. While it is a pre-released item, and because the Pinkertons don't have jurisdiction in Australia.
Now, you can't pin that on them.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I also stole that joke from Reddit, I'm gonna admit.
Will Australians pay attention? You know the culture better than we do. Do you think they're going to actually... I mean, they didn't sign any NDAs.
I mean, I've seen a couple of photos. I have seen a couple of photos floating out there of people that have posted around. And you're right, Diana, like they didn't sign any NDAs. And this is kind of a hard situation, I think, for any publisher who wants to, I don't want to say control the message, but kind of feel the hype, you know, everybody gets it all at once. The community is excited and sharing and there's that community vibe to it. Being spoiled a little bit by this accident, but also it's kind of on them. Like, come on, like... You don't want to squash the excitement of the fans that have managed to grab it early.
Yeah, 6 weeks is the real killer here. You know, there are some games that release or that leak, a week, maybe 2 before their street date, either because of an overzealous brick and mortar shop or because of, in the case of the latest Legend of Zelda game, someone literally raiding the files from a secure server. It's like, these things happen and the company deals with it as best they can. 6 weeks is a long time to try and keep the lid on hype and spoilers. And especially knowing Critical Role, they're a media company. They're gonna, I imagine there's going to be something of a media firestorm, that they intended to have, not a firestorm, but a fireworks show that they want to lead this brand new mainline RPG off with. And well, my hope is that they're able to recapture some of that lightning just a little bit.
Well, the old saying that most campaigns don't even last like 4 sessions. People's campaigns could already be done by the time the game comes out everywhere else. So you don't want to take away the joy for those poor 3 or 4 session players whose lives, PC speaking, are over already.
From what I could tell, I think this is only the case if you pre-ordered it through Darrington Press directly. I don't think there's too many Australian game shops that are taking pre-orders. None that I could find except for Good Games. I'm going to assume that anybody who pre-ordered through Good Games may not have received it yet because it would have gone to the game shop as opposed to directly to the person. And I'm also going to assume if you're in Australia and you rush out and pre-order it now, you're probably not going to get sent it early. I think they've figured out what went wrong on their end. But for what it's worth, from the photos I've seen of just, mostly the box and then a couple of photos of kind of a book and the card pack that's open or whatever, it looks great. It looks beautiful. It's a very high production quality kind of thing. So
that's reassuring, actually. It's kind of, if anything, it's positive, to hear at the end that it's not like people got it 6 weeks early and it's falling apart within a week 2, know?
That's the worst case scenario.
For what it's worth, May 20th is when most other folks will need to wait for the official launch of Daggerheart. And speaking of hearts and daggers in them, Dragon Delve's preview has been shown. For the record, this book looks great, but the title is a dagger to my heart because I just can't stand it. The grammar's all wrong. It's Dragon Delves apostrophe, I'm pretty sure. Do the Delves own the dragon? I'm pretty sure this is accurate. This is what I put in my show notes. Let me double check it now. But yeah, Dragon, it's not Dragon's Delve, it's Dragon Delves. And I'm pretty sure there's an apostrophe.
No, that's a trademark symbol you're seeing right there.
All right, you got me there. You got me on that one. I still don't love it. But it looks like a cool book. Did anybody else check out the previews for it?
I love the art.
I was just going to say that. It looks gorgeous.
Very eclectic, the art style. So it's, for folks who don't know, 10 adventures, levels 1 to 12, the art kind of varying between those adventures to kind of match the style of the adventure, as the adventures kind of change from the more whimsical and fairy tale-like to the grimmer and darker as you go through the anthology of different adventures. Each adventure features a different dragon type, both chromatic and metallic, across all age groups as well. We don't know yet if you fight a legendary or an ancient dragon, I should say, but level 12 might still be. Is that low to fight a legendary dragon? What do we think?
Oh gosh, there's like the mega dragons that stretch their lives across several multiverses, right? Like the massive ones. That's something I was kind of hoping would come out of this book, if anything, is the fact that it stops at level 12 is a little disappointing. Like, it's Dungeons and Dragons, and you're not going to have me fight a dragon at the best possible level. I don't know. I feel like that would have been cool, but they're not arch dragons. Someone has to have the name of this on the tip of their tongue. When I don't.
Are you talking about
the Fizban's, right? I think it was in Fizban's.
It was in
Let's
Fizban's.
check the texts.
There you go. The ancient tomes.
Yes.
I feel like a bad D&D player now for not knowing this.
No, I know what you're talking about. It was
Great
like
Worms. Someone
the
in
Great
chat
Worms.
had
That's
it.
why we're thinking of Great Worms, of course.
There you go. So in post later, we'll edit it and make it sound
Dante,
really
if you
good.
could just
Perfect timing.
Yeah,
So if I don't know what level you're supposed to fight a Great Worm at. Hopefully it gets there. If not, missed opportunity. But going up to only level 12 doesn't give me too much hope.
I mean, damn, even the monster manual has dragons higher than that. Yeah, Gem Great Worm challenge 26. Something tells me we're not going to be fighting any of them in this adventure.
No, I get the impression this will probably be relatively Monster Manual-esque, like 2025 Monster Manual, 5 metallic, 5 chromatic dragons across the 10 adventures. I don't think they've said that explicitly, but that is going to be my assumption. The other interesting thing here, I kind of put it as a separate news item, but I'm going to pull it up now, which I found particularly interesting, was that Dragon Delves, TM, is going to feature 3 adventures. It's going to feature 3 adventures with solo play, meaning 1 DM and 1 player. So really duo play or couples play rather than solo play. But I thought that was interesting. These adventures, less combat focused, and the character will get Boon of Lone Hero or something like that it's called. I think they were thinking off the top of their head, which gives them temporary hit points, heroic inspiration, and a few other things. This seemed attractive to people wanting to maybe dip their toe into GMing, but they're not confident GMing for a whole group.
I mean, if not that, then at the very least, kind of like the general shift that the industry, the community is kind of taking towards either solo or duo gameplay is something that I've noticed and people have been kind of screaming out for in D&D for a while. If you go to the subreddit, there's a lot there with regards to modules that have been modified for 2-player gameplay. I don't 100% know if it's going to be easier on the GM, if anything. Like, if with regards to things like the action economy and whatnot, is it going to be that this boon of the solo hero is enough to make up for the lack of other player characters, or is the GM just going to have to shoehorn in a bunch of like NPCs and henchmen? I guess I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to work. It might end up being more work for them.
The interview that this came out in was from James Wyatt. And I thought this interesting that James was now the spokesperson with Chris and other things happening that we will report soon. And they asked about the sidekick characters, which has been introduced previously. Will sidekicks be a part of this? And they James sort of glossed past that. So sidekicks wasn't. And it came out that these adventures weren't specifically written for solo play. They were written and they were thought to be good ones that might support solo play. So it sounds like they tacked on a way for solo play to happen without having to come up with all these new rules. So it's like, let's give lots of temporary hit points and let's give a heroic inspiration. And then one person should be able to handle it. But it brings up an interesting point of finding new expressions of D&D rather than 1 DM and 4 to 6 players in a 2 to 4 hour session. And I would love to see this carried through from the beginning. rather than trying to add it on to an existing adventure.
I mean, at that rate, you could even do entire tables where, have a module built from start to finish to be able to accommodate anywhere from 1 to 6 players, and just make it so like, okay, in this room, if you have 1 player, then you fight a black ooze. And if you have 2 players, then it's like 3 other some creatures. I'm blanking on the name of every other creature in the monster manual right now for some reason. But I used to do that manually with my Curse of Strahd games to make it. Yeah, like 7 great worms all at once.
Yeah. I know other monsters.
And then a roper. Yeah, I feel like if you can do something like that, maybe just make that a general piece of advice going forward for DMs, something in, I don't know, some addendum somewhere.
That's something that organized play has done for a long time. Because when you go to a convention or have a game day, you never know how many people are going to show up. So there have been tiering outlines in adventures to say exactly that. If you have a very strong party, do this. But I don't think having 1 player and 1 DM is going to make it any easier on a DM, for sure. In fact, shoehorning that in might make it much more difficult, as you said, Diana, with the action economy. If you can, let me attack the other person while you are low on hit points and need to heal. There is none of that in a solo duo play.
When the DM's Guild was in its early years, there was a really big community movement for duet D&D, and that specifically is for like 1 DM and 1 player, and it got a lot of traction. There were some authors who only wrote these duet adventures because it was the way that they played, the way that they played with their wife or with their husband. That's the kind of D&D they played, and so that's the kind of adventures they wrote, and it found a lot of traction. And I was always shocked. Like, I wrote about this when I was with Geek and Sundry at the time. It was a big deal. And I'm shocked that it never got more traction. It feels like you're saying, Shawn, almost like an obliviousness to the ways that D&D can be played outside of the traditional norm of 1 DM and 4 to 6, 3 to 6 player characters. It really is, well, I'm glad they're doing something. Right? It's a cool little idea, but it feels like every time they do it, they kind of throw away what they did last time and they try something new. And the curse of having a regular monthly or quarterly or release schedule is that the deadline is always upon you. And when these things are afterthoughts, they never get the attention they deserve to actually make it. And unfortunately, I have to guess that they don't see these kinds of smaller duet adventures as being a big enough driver of profit to be worth, building from the ground up. Rather, it's just, and we'll attach this extra little bit onto it.
Yeah, I wonder, because I that's an interesting question in terms of like how lucrative are duet adventures. Because if you think of like a group of 5 players and a GM and a group of 2 people where one's GMing, in theory, you're only selling 1 copy of that adventure to both those groups. Are you selling more of that adventure? Are there more large groups or larger groups or more duet groups potentially out there in the market if you're able to engineer an adventure to go both ways? And doing that is not as easy, presumably, as engineering an adventure specifically for a larger group or a duet adventure. But I'm kind of hopefully curious about Dragon Delves specifically for 2 reasons. First is the duet adventure, and second, and they showed a preview of this for one of the adventures, James Wyatt talked about the cheat sheet, which is just like quick info at the start of each of the adventures, like characters with their names and their kind of like what their main shtick is, if you will, main story beats, and what stat blocks to earmark in the monster manual, which I find helpful because a lot of the time when you try to like start, okay, what's this adventure really about? It feels like you've got to read 3 or 4 pages at the start of an adventure to actually understand, read the adventure background, then read the adventure, overview, then read the character outlines, blah, blah, blah. So for that reason, plus this duo adventure, or these 3 duet adventures, giving DMs who are perhaps a little bit gun shy about stepping in front of a whole group, just that practice of being the GM, of running the rest of the game without feeling like they're spotlit among a large group of people, I think is a positive thing. I was describing this to my wife last night and she was like, oh, maybe I'll GM that for you. And I was like, that sounds great. I would love to do that. And I also think that the cognitive load on a DM, while I agree, yes, they will potentially have to grapple with, side characters or whatever else is going on. They also have the less cognitive load of they don't have 5 player characters who they're trying to remember what all their abilities are and all their personal character needs and wants are all at the same time to juggle that at the table, which can be its own thing. Sorry, Diana, you were going to jump in.
No. I think that's fantastic, honestly. And also the way that you said that your wife was down to DM for you now, I was like, oh my God, yes, please, more women. But also the entirety of 5e24 has been so geared towards helping the DM more so than they ever really have before. And I'm glad to hear that they're still kind of rolling into it and building the modules out with the GM in mind more so than they have been. And the fact that it has cheat sheets is fantastic. I absolutely loved that about the 5.25 DMG. Gosh, what a wordy title. You know what I mean? And so it's good to hear. That's what I want to see more of.
It's something that I've been incorporating into my design on projects that I'm working on behind the scenes because it's just so useful, right? The ability to, as game designers, our goal is to create this collaborative relationship with the game master, right? You are both game designers, the person writing the book and the person running it in the moment. There's so much that we can't do from behind our computer to make the game yours that you can. And sometimes it gets a little lost in translation. And that can be beautiful in the way that, all art kind of spins out into its own unique fractals of individual creativity. And yet it is also challenging for new GMs, especially if you've never played this game before, or if you're playing a brand new game, right, that isn't D&D and something you don't have all this institutional knowledge extant for. Having someone there, even if it's like a guided notes sheet to help you through and be like, okay, these are the things that will make it easy to have this adventure be awesome. Not just passable, not just, made it through by the skin of your teeth, but hit the narrative beats, hit the combat beats, have it be awesome. It is, vital. They've been trying to solve this problem forever, right? The older cousin problem. You've been introduced to D&D by your older cousin, and that's how you're able to DM for it. Some people just pick it up off the store shelf. They don't have an older cousin, so who's going to be that? In the early internet era, there were guided flash games, basically, that walk you through it. That's my introduction from the 3rd edition era. It's been Matt Colville for a lot of people in 5e. It's been the Critical Role people for a lot of people in this era also. But it doesn't need to be this high tech. I think a worksheet, a guided bit of GM note taking and session prep, that'll do it, man. That'll do it.
Well, speaking of high tech, the other bit of news that kind of came out of this as I was spying the D&D Beyond page, which I thought was interesting, if you purchase the digital version of the Dragon Delves on D&D Beyond and get the D&D Beyond version, that also includes, as listed as features, 22 maps, monster tokens, and 12, and they're calling these stickers. I haven't heard of this before, but I feel like these have been probably a feature of maps for a little while now, which I believe from the description on the marketplace page are like chairs, top-down scenery pieces, top-down bits of things to kind of customize the map as you're playing it in D&D Beyond through maps. Does that make sense? And then on top of that, if you get the ultimate bundle, which is you purchase the digital and physical copies, that gives you +5 more maps in D&D Beyond Maps and 10 exclusive stickers for a total of 22, I assume, stickers for D&D Beyond Maps.
Can you tell me in excruciating detail how these stickers work? Because my brain is just not grokking it.
No, because I have no idea. So let's assume that you've got a top-down map. This is what I'm imagining from the description on the marketplace page. You've got a top-down map, and let's say you've got a bookshelf and some chairs and a nest, and these things that you can move. Maybe a campfire, and these are just art pieces from the top down that you could move around and place in the scene to give the map a sense of detail, a sense of place. Maybe it's a forest map and it's just a generic forest and your party are like, we short rest or long rest. And it's like, okay, I'm going to throw down the fireplace, the campfire sticker and some bedroll stickers. And now this is a campfire and you guys are having your long rest now. That's how I assume and just for people listening who may have missed it, assume these work.
Just like those like felt boards you play with in kindergarten, where you have like the little felt trees and cars and you just slap them down. Except they're locked behind a physical/digital paywall. That is an interesting move. I'd be really curious to see the stats on how many people buy the physical versus the digital versus the both bundles for these sorts of releases, you know?
If you're prepping an adventure, and this is an open question for all three of you, who prefers to have a digital, even if that's PDF, especially if it's like a third-party product, who prefers to have a digital copy of the book or a physical copy of the adventure book if you could only choose one?
I could only choose one. Definitely digital. But I'm also stuck behind my computer 24/7, and most of my friends live half a world away in, God forbid, Australia and other countries. So it's really, I always have the physical version or the digital version because it's just easier for me for running digital games. The physicals I have around mostly for bragging rights, so they look cool as backdrops, but I never open them really.
Yeah, that's fair.
Hey, God forbid nothing. They got Daggerheart 6 weeks early, so that's a real country if you ask me.
Man,
I'm kind of weird because I go back and forth in terms of what I prefer. I very much like having a physical copy of an adventure book open next to me when I'm prepping and kind of flicking through the pages because my notes are digital. So instead of alt tabbing or whatever across between windows on a computer, I can just read from the book next to me and take my notes digitally that way. But then I also like quick referencing things like, word searching for like a name or a term or something in the book. And that's very helpful to have the PDF for, obviously. So I think I'm kind of the market person for digital and physical. I don't need 10 extra stickers, but that might be me is the answer.
What if one of the stickers, Ben, was like a crossbow that shot stakes to kill vampires? Would you then really need stickers?
That'd be more like a staker.
This is why I kind of put this piece of news in here specifically around D&D Beyond MAPS, right? Is because this feels like how they might have wanted Sigil to work, or at least it feels like a better use case for Sigil, where when you purchase an adventure, you can pay a bit extra or whatever, however they sell it, to get that adventure pre-made in Sigil. Because my understanding is with these stickers in particular and with these maps, if you purchase this adventure, they're not necessarily hard locked. I could bring up a map from Dragon Delves while I'm running Tomb of Annihilation and I just like this map for whatever specific purpose. So it's kind of giving you that extra content that is flexible to be used in whatever context as a GM you want to use it. And I believe that's true with stickers as well. Right. And it's just interesting to me that like this marketing strategy, I'm not going to say it works because I don't have any stats on it to say if it's actually selling books or anything, but it feels a lot more pragmatic and it feels a lot more attractive to me as a GM than Sigil managed to accomplish. Probably because it's a lot easier to hand draw a campfire from the top and call it a sticker than to physically digitally animate a fire that flickers and moves and does all the things and then port it into the map. You know what I mean?
Well, this might be what you were getting at, Ben, because with stickers, what you can do is you can buy an adventure and it has the statue in the center of the room, but you want to use that same room for a different adventure without the statue. So if you make it a sticker, instead of putting it on the map always, you add flexibility to the usability for the maps in other areas, for other adventures, for homebrew, what have you.
Yes. So there's the Dragon Delves news.
Sorry, Ben, I'm still thinking about that question you asked earlier about print versus digital. And I think what I'm settling on is it's got to be print all the way. And this is a big change from my answer previously. If you'd asked me this a year ago, I would have said it's got to be digital because so much of the work I do, I need to reference digital sources. I need to go back into the books and be like, okay, well, what was the lore about Laeral Silverhand and the town of Silvery Moon? It's like, and then having it on D&D Beyond and indexed and searchable is vital. But I found these days, and I would run all of my games on D&D Beyond with 12 tabs open. I'm coming to the idea, and maybe I'm going to sound like a boomer saying this, but like I think digital is maybe kind of soft. I ran without D&D Beyond the other day, and I came to hate having like 4 books open beside me. And it might sound like I'm saying the opposite of what I mean, but don't worry, we'll get there. Trust the story. Because I love reading hardcover books. I hate reading on a screen. I spend all day in front of a screen anyway. The last thing I want to do is read for fun on all of this. And so my favorite way to read a D&D adventure is to, I'll take my little Saga of the Seasons and I'll get in my bed and I'll pop it open and I'll just like read through the thing. And then when it comes time to take notes, I'm going to be doing my damnedest to set myself up to never, ever, ever open this hardcover at the table.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
And that's what I want out of these like worksheets too, right? That we're talking about for Dragon Delves. And for the stuff I'm working on, honestly, is to make it so that all of this prep can obviate the need for the physical book as anything other than something that I sit down and peruse between sessions. Because that's the ideal use case for a hardcover book. It's sitting back in your Victorian armchair with a roaring fire next to you while sipping on a snifter of brandy, right? That's how everyone wants to read a book.
Yes, I agree with you completely. Digital is used for quick reference for me, but if I'm like reading the adventure, at the moment I'm reading through Citadel of the Unseen Sun and very glad that we have our physicals of those now that I can just grab the versions out or the chapters out and read physically. But it depends. I have become a bit more reliant on the D&D Beyond monster manual or just monster database, whether it's from the monster manual or a third party or whatever, of just searching monster types through there. What I used to do previously was go to the PDF and Control F plants. If I was like, all right, show me all the plant monsters in here. And that's fraught if plant is just the dragons plant their feet before they breathe their fire. You know what I mean? So I find I use less physical monster manuals than I used to.
I feel like if anything, most of the time that I spend actually on D&D Beyond is using the character editor, and most of the books that I buy are just for the sake of being able to make a character without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Listen, I did the math like twice back in the early 2010s, and I refuse to do it again. So that's how I get most of my digital stuff.
That's fair. I mean, we just started a new campaign 2 weekends ago, and it's only 3 players, so it's not a great sample size, but everybody's on D&D Beyond. And I'm like, oh, well, man, times have changed. Not a physical character sheet to be seen. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of phasing things out, the old guard of Wizards of the Coast are being phased out by self-election. Jeremy Crawford also retiring from Wizards of the Coast. Announced only a week or so after Chris Perkins announced the same. Jeremy Crawford, I don't think Crawford themselves have made any like public statement on this, but there was an interview I saw with Jess Lanzillo, who's the VP of franchise and product at Wizards of the Coast, expressing her gratitude to both Jeremy and Chris for getting to work alongside them for the last 12 months or so, and making it clear that for both gentlemen, they were leaving on their own terms. This is not any sort of like corporate restructuring or internal thing like that, according to that interview. Thank you, Jeremy, for your years of service, for your 20-something years of service. Great dude. I got to meet him in person last year, interview him for a video that we did on our YouTube channel. And just like Chris, we chatted to them at the same time. They were both great dudes. So yeah, good luck in the future.
Jeremy's an awesome guy. Yeah, that time at PAX Unplugged, Ben, where he was kind of holding court at that D&D party, when he was this enormous repository of stories and just, I don't know how to describe it other than attitude. Ben, you and I had the same experience of hearing him talk about his dark fantasy campaign that had like left people in tears. And we had this moment talking about like, yeah, is that true? I have no idea, but it sounded awesome.
It's the legend of Jeremy Crawford's dark fantasy campaign.
That's the thing. Chris and Jeremy are these masters of the legend of D&D. And in a medium like this, the legend is everything, right? Sure. Back at the beginning of 5e, it seemed really apparent that Wizards did not want to go making celebrities out of their staff. And yet, just through the power of their charisma and their myth-making, and Todd Kenrick doggedly interviewing them, even as just sort of an outsider,
chasing him down in the corridor. Imagining Todd running around with a camera.
Dude, when Todd was just that Dungeon Life, a Patreon thing, before he was at D&D Beyond, before he was at Wizards, like, I have to assume that's kind of what it was like. They've done incredibly well for themselves and for D&D. And just like we were saying with Chris, I can't imagine any one person filling Jeremy's mythically sized shoes when he's gone.
I still remember at PAX South when it was in San Antonio, and Chris had stepped back from Acquisitions Incorporated, and Jeremy was going to take over. And I was standing in line waiting to get into the show. And this person in front of me was just belly aching. Oh, Chris is not running the game. They've got this other guy, this Jeremy. I don't even know who that is. Oh, it's going to be terrible. And I finally said, listen, dude, Jeremy is Chris's DM, right? Jeremy is not only going to fill Chris's shoes very well, but I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. And you saw the difference immediately between Chris and Jeremy, right? Chris was one sort of DM who had his particular stamp, and then Jeremy stepped forward, and it was just go time. The theatrics, the presence, just absolutely knocked it out of the park right from the start. I've never seen so many people chanting blood and then cheese back to back in the audience based on Jeremy's presentation, and that's what you got with Jeremy, right? You got an absolutely brilliant editorial mind, an absolutely brilliant rules mind, and then the presence to be able to place it all in front of an audience. And it will be hard to replace that.
Presence and presentation. I had never appreciated just how good an orator Jeremy Crawford is until it was Gen Con last year. Before I was speaking to him personally, I was at an event where he was speaking about the future of D&D. And there is not an a pause to like think of what he's going to say next. Like it is just fluent speech. Like a waterfall endlessly. And then speaking to him in person is very similar experience. An exceptionally talented man who, as they're pointing out in chat, is not dead. He's just leaving Wizards of the Coast. So we're not, this is not a wake.
Dante, can you put like a black and white photo of Jeremy in loving memory of your employment at Wizards of the Coast?
Pages in these books are in many ways like the most valuable pages in the D&D book. Yes. Again, these are the books that are the foundation for everything else. And so we made sure in that early planning that what was going to go in here was going to essentially earn its keep.
Yeah, I like to sit at the table and just listen to Jeremy chuckle once in a while, or he'll stumble upon a little bit of text that just, tickles his fancy. And it's such a delight to see that even among us who have read these pages multiple times and have rewritten pages multiple times, that they're still fun.
But the sunset sunrise, whatever the expression is, because joining Wizards of the Coast is Greg Bilsland, as I shamelessly rip off Mastering Dungeons news from last week. But I enjoy this news because, certain members of the YouTube space have been, bemoaning, is this the end of Wizards of the Coast? The why the lead designers are abandoning Dungeons and Dragons, or why they're jumping ship at this very moment, blah, 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 blah. And I like this story of Greg Bilsland rejoining Wizards of the Coast. I'll admit, I didn't know who Greg Bilsland was before Mastering Dungeons exactly 1 week ago. And yet, it's like, okay, this is a changing of the guard, not a falling apart of the watch, if that analogy made sense.
I also had no idea who he was until I opened another tab as you were speaking and Googled him. It seems like he's been
Greg Bilsland anyway?
Second, right? Someone is saying that he hasn't been around since 4E.
He at the end of 4th edition and at the start of 5th edition, Greg was still the executive producer, or I think that was his title, executive producer at Wizards. So he oversaw so much content that was created for 4th edition, beginning of 5th edition, D&D Next, and so on. He's been away from Wizards for a hot minute. He was at Bungie for a bit, and now he is returning, probably to start to fill the shoes of the two folks who are leaving. And I'm sure we will get more announcements of other hires that will begin that process. It's so funny that the haters of Wizards of the Coast point to Paizo and point to other companies that, oh, look at the designers at Paizo and how great they are. And then Wizards hires these Paizo developers, designers, and all of a sudden now they're no good anymore. They must be terrible because now they're at Wizards of the Coast, even though they were great when they were with Paizo. So you have all sorts of fine developers, designers, editors, producers, creators who are still there, who will have a lot of work to do to fill those 4 shoes, but they will be able to pull themselves up, I'm sure, and at least give it a good effort.
Speaking of Paizo designers turned Wizards of the Coast designers, I just want to shout them out. 2 of Paizo's greats being Amanda Hammond and Wes Schneider over there at Wizards right now. Wes, I had lunch with him and Justice a little while ago, and they're just the best guys, right? Like, on top of being great humans, every bit the equal of storytellers, of people like Chris and Jeremy, and not a single one of them is a slouch. Way early in my career, I played in a game of Wes's at a PaizoCon back in 2017 or 16 or something like that. I don't remember the name of it. It was his sort of, Ravenloft would make it Pathfinders, like the Bastard Hall or something like that. And it was his, yearly PaizoCon game where things would be gothic and bloody and awful. And just the generosity he extended to me at the time, a total stranger who just wrote something nice about their Heroes of Horror book on the internet, just reached out to me and said, hey, you want to play in this game? And I played it, and he's one of the best GMs I've ever had. Right? No one who makes it to the D&D creative team is a slouch in any way, right? They're all the best of the best, and it shows.
Just a very quick check-in this week because, so it's not completely unspoken. Obviously, the situation around the tariffs with the US is changing rapidly, has changed rapidly. So a lot of what we said last week was out of date within 24 hours of that episode going live. Nothing has changed from Ghostfire's perspective. We're still at the wait and see stage, which I apologize for anybody who might be anxious about price increases or what might happen there, across the industry. An article just this morning went up on EN World titled, "Do Tariffs Apply to RPG Books? Maybe, maybe not," which is the best answer we have at the moment. But, everything could reverse course very suddenly or get worse very quickly. So we're just at the wait and see stage for the time being. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole for a second week in a row. So let's just skirt the edge and go over to Josh, who sent an email to podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. And Josh asked the question, how do you visualize a dungeon for your players? Do you do it entirely theater of the mind, draw it out on square or hex grid, let them draw it on paper to try and puzzle together the dungeon themselves, print it out on multiple sheets and reveal as they go a mix of all these methods? Do you use a VTT or full color printed maps? Diana, how do you prefer to visualize kind of the game space, if you will?
First of all, having your players draw the map for you is a new one to me. I have never heard of someone doing that before, but I mean, if your players are artists, make the as best use of it as you can, I guess. Personally, I have a bit of a toss-up between VTTs and Theater of the Mind, and I tend to use specifically Talespire quite often, mostly because I'm incredibly lazy, and a lot of people on the internet have already built out entire dungeons that I can just quite literally copy and paste over. This isn't an ad unless Talespire wants to sponsor Ghostfire. I don't know why you would, but go off, I guess.
Hey, Talespire.
I just love it so much. But the problem with that is when I play virtually and my players are in Talespire, they start running around the room and they are like, oh, is this painting actually here? Is this random, cabinet in the corner actually in the room? Like, is this crate here? And I have to go through my notes and I'm like, no, that's just decor, guys. Like, it's fine. You can't actually look in it. So I have to, and that's just a consequence of having amazing players who are also amazingly detail oriented, is I try to do my best to match the VTT to what's actually in there so they can actually feel like they can interact with anything that they see, which becomes a problem if the VTT doesn't have all those assets that you need, or you have to start switching one thing out for another, the cabinets for bookshelves and vice versa, things like that. So I try and do Theater of the Mind first, and then I open up the room in the VTT and let them wander around. I lift the fog of war once they know what it looks like in their head first.
Gotcha.
And then that kind of gives them the cues beforehand on what they can and can't interact with. And then they can take a look at what's actually in the room. So
can I ask, just on particularly using like a detail-oriented VTT like Tailspire, because during lockdowns in particular, I was using VTTs much more. Do you have the entire, let's say it's a dungeon, is the entire dungeon mapped out in the VTT, or is it combat spaces that are kind of connected in your mind that you load up different maps at different times?
I personally have every aspect of the world mapped out. So it could be the entire dungeon, every layer of it, all the rooms are connected. You can move up and down in a 3-dimensional space and whatnot. And there's water levels and things like that. But I'll also map out shops and whatnot.
Okay.
I'll map out every little bit of a town, every well, what's inside the well, things like that. But that's because I am insane and I used to have no hobbies outside of this. So maybe don't do that unless you have all the time in the world. But
well, that was the issue that I experienced, was I would spend, hours. I was subscribed to I'm going to forget the name of the Patreon now, but it was basically like an isometric style dungeon assets that you could then take. It was just the art assets, but you could import it into whatever VTT you wanted to. Epic Isometric was the name of it. Would spend hours putting bookshelves and then potions on those bookshelves, and a skull should be here and a barrel over here, and this is where the wizard sleeps, and here I've put a partition because they get changed behind there, like all this ridiculous detail that's not necessary, but then would lose all the time that I would have left for actually like deciding what are the rules of this dungeon? Like, what's in here? What monsters are in here? What DC are the investigation checks, et cetera, et cetera. So I love VTTs in theory, but I dislike the sacrifice I have to make in terms of balancing what I'm prepping. But you don't find that to be too much of an issue?
no, but that's because I was a kid who played with like dolls and Legos growing up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just the same thing, but I can share it with my friends. I think part of it comes from how much satisfaction you get out of the actual like preparation part of D&D and the building, and how much fun you're having versus how much you're thinking of it as like, oh God, I have to fill this bookshelf with books and skulls and things. And so if you're not having fun, maybe it's not for you. Maybe you should force yourself into a different tabletop, VTT. But if you are having fun, then yeah, amazing. Fantastic. Go off, spend hours doing it, and don't feel guilty about it. I don't know. I feel like DMs especially have a lot of guilt when it comes to things like prepping maps, prepping encounters, and painting miniatures and whatnot. I feel like the community just kind of has to take a breather every once in a while. And I remind myself of this all the time. It's for fun. We're having fun here. Please have fun. Oh God, please have fun.
I want to take that and run with it, because the we're having fun here is the ultimate expression of this. When I run online, I have two major sources. Well, three major sources. One is Owlbear Rodeo, a very lightweight VTT. It has no bells and whistles, and that's just how I like it. And what I'll do is I'll go to video games I like and find their art assets on wikis or whatever and stamp tokens out of them and put them in a folder for me to use. And then I'll go to a handful of Patreon map makers, in particular Chepeku, not an ad, just a fan, who make these unbelievably detailed maps with so many variants. Pay them $5 a month, and I have all of my maps basically set for life. And the maps are so incredibly detailed because they're illustrators as much as they are cartographers. And so they want to do some storytelling within their art. And that does lead to this sort of conflict that I think you were building towards, Diana, which is sometimes you run into these things that clash with the story that you're trying to tell. Or at least if a player goes and asks, hey, what's on this shelf? It's got a hand with a candle in the palm. And it's like, I don't know what's going on with the hand. It's got a candle in the palm. I'll make an investigation check, because my goal is to only in the direst of straits say someone else made this map, as you know, and it's just a simulacrum of what's going on here. No, as much as I can, 99% of cases, if I can manage it, all of a sudden Chepeku become co-collaborators in this adventure by virtue of having a map that has interesting detail in it, and I'll just run with it. I like to be surprised as the DM too. So often the entire world is kind of in my hands. I don't know, having the map throw me a curveball every now and then is fun. And the players like it too.
With the 3rd edition, 4th edition, and 5th edition rules, mapping and placement and positioning became super important.
Mm-hmm.
So you needed a map of some sort. I'm glad Diana said players making the maps? I've never heard of that before. Pull up a chair. It's time for Stories with Weird Uncle Shawn.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
In first and second edition, the maps of the actual rooms were less important than the maps of the dungeon because the DM, or generally the way the game was supposed to be played, was the game master does not put out a map. The game master will say you are in a corridor 30 feet long, and then it turns left for 20 feet and then right for 100 feet, and then there's a door. And there was a player whose specific job it was to map, and you would map. And if you got the map wrong and you ended up not knowing where you were, that was part of the game. Because at some point, since there was no such thing as a short rest, and since you ran out of spells very quickly, getting out of the dungeon was just as important as getting through the dungeon. So if you did that map correctly, you had no idea where you were. And therefore, you could not get out of the dungeon, and therefore you could not rest. So you had to literally figure it out and explore and find your way out, to the point where there were character options that told you if you went up or down a certain degree. Because why would dungeons have ramps or little tunnels that go up or down? Because it would mess with the mapper. If the mapper didn't know that this one tunnel went over or under another, they would map incorrectly and it would get weird. So that's why the dwarf could say, wait, we've got an incline here. So mapper, we're going to be going up. So maybe we're going to another level.
Goodness.
And that is where different parts of the history of D&D have changed the way that we interact. Now I wouldn't even think of not putting out a map of a room. It would be inconceivable to try to play theater of the mind with that way. But we'll skip the corridors between the rooms because that's not as important. When it was just the opposite back in the day. And all the little teleportation things, or the rooms that turn when you enter them and you don't realize it, you don't feel it, that was to mess with mappers. So if you go back and you play old first edition adventures where for some reason you step on this square, but you end up in a square over here, that was to mess with mapping. That was his whole sole purpose of being there.
The original question coming in again from Josh was saying that they're playing Shadow Dark, which is an OSR game, which I believe is intended to play a lot more like those older styles or older editions of D&D. So is that the advice that's given in Shadow Dark? Do you know, Shawn?
I haven't gone back and looked specifically in Shadow Dark, but I have in my notes here, ask Ben why he left the Shadow Dark part out, because that's the most important part of this question, right? This question is about this OSR feel of that game and the OSR feel in general for making exploration an actually really important part of this whole game, is being able to figure your way through the dungeon with all the little tricks that might be played upon you as you go through it.
Well, that's the way that I tend to visualize is theater of the mind for the most part. Because as I was saying before, I find that while I find the production values of a VTT, whether it's 2D, 3D, isometric, whatever it is, to be brilliant. And I've talked about it on this podcast in the past, how I've used, Fog of War to create like false walls and things that work practically when they're discovered in game. But because they take so much prep away from what I find more fun about the game, which is the storytelling, kind of by incident, I end up playing very, very theater of the mind. And I don't demand that players draw up the map. They can if they want to for themselves to get a visual idea of what the rooms look like and how they connect together. Generally, if players want to leave the dungeon, I just kind of say, all right, you leave the dungeon, rather than narrating like, okay, you're back in this room, you're back in this room, you're back in this room. But based on what you've just said, Shawn, that's giving me new ideas of little tricks and tips in terms of like, well, after you leave this room, the trap resets. Or after you leave this room, new monsters crawl into it. Or after you leave, kind of almost Dark Soulsian in the way that it refreshes the dungeon as the players move through it, rather than being like a cleared area of the dungeon forever after the players have moved through. The time when I start mapping out things, is when a combat encounter is about to start, which is also what makes me resistant to using VTTs, is because I like combat encounters to be able to kind of happen anywhere. I don't, if I've got a VTT or even just like an art drawn map and the fight spills out of the house or spills onto the street or spills into the corridor and that's not mapped, that does my head in. So I like having the flexibility of just, it looks very like, I guess, mid-2010s D&D now, very mid-5e D&D now, but it's just like the wet erase markers on the grid is the with miniatures, is the style that is how I tend to visualize things once we get past that theater of the mind stage and into, combat.
That's all reliable, man. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I feel like that's old school now.
But it's the most convenient. You run a one shot at some other location that's not your home. Just pull out a map and some markers in your guide.
Yeah.
But don't use permanent markers or don't use dry erase markers on vinyl maps, or will have. There was a adventure with Huffins, Guffins, Muffins. It was a franchised muffin, and someone drew it on the map. And it didn't erase. So therefore, every dungeon had the Huffins, Guffins, Muffins franchise from that day forward.
They sponsor every dungeon.
Exactly. It's
they get a sick deal out of it.
You need your coffee. It's always just right around the corner, like certain coffee shops in the US.
Speaking of sponsors, this episode of the Lorecast is not sponsored, but you can still help us out by giving us likes and thumbs and stars and stuff on your podcast platform of choice, whether you're listening on YouTube, Twitch. Thanks for all the subscriptions today. Welcome to the MCDM Raiders, if any of you are still in here. And Diana, if folks want to find more of your content, where can they go to find it?
Oh gosh, unfortunately everywhere. I'm Diana Faye, also known as @DianaTheRose on all platforms. If you're watching on Twitch live right now, I am here. I was going to go live today. I'll do it later. Normally I'm more consistent though. I'm also a short form creator and long form creator, giving people advice on how to be better at tabletop games the easy way. So if you want some distilled 1 minute 30 type info on just the little things you can do to be a pro DM, I'm your gal. And then I'm also over on Instagram where I am a model occasionally. I'm also a host of my own podcast, which is Worlds Apart, where my friend Odie and I sit down and do some actual live world building right in front of your eyes. And then later on we drag in some of our content creator friends and do some actual plays in the world that you watched us build. So that's a new project that's pretty fun. And then I'm also at pretty much every convention known to man. I barely live at home nowadays. But yeah, that's me.
Well, looking forward to catching up with you at PAX Oz this year.
Yes. So excited.
I will definitely be there as well.
Depending on how these tariffs go that we're not talking about, my US dollar might go really far or not. We'll find out.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that because I'll be at Gen Con earlier in the year, so we'll see how our dollars exchange.
Oh no.
Trade war stories about exchange rates. Anyway.
Well, trade wars.
That was a really good
trade wars.
Yeah, I don't know if you meant to do it, Ben, but that was a great pun right there.
Yeah.
I actually did not, but there you go.
Oh, man.
Well, Dante could just edit it like I meant to do it. Anyway, we'll be back next week. You can catch us 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on Twitch at ghostfire_official. The Eldritch Lorecast, that's the name of the podcast. I'm always real bad at this. I've been here with Ben Byrne, Diana Faye, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. And we're out, I think.
That's all I got in me. I got a single bar.